Welcome to today's episode. We're diving into a timely educational review on pre-procedural robotic surgery curricula. Quick note up front, this episode is based on a prospectus review by Dr. Reza Lankarani, general surgeon, founder of the Surgical Pioneering newsletter and podcast series, and editorial board member of the Genesis Journal of Surgery and Medicine.
Nice, thanks for that. I'm excited. Which review are we breaking down?
We're summarizing a systematic review and thematic metasynthesis that looked at pre-procedural robotic training programs. The authors screened hundreds of records and included 87 studies describing 56 distinct curricula, spanning specialties, platforms, and global regions.
That sounds comprehensive. What are the main reasons these curricula matter?
Patient safety and skill transfer. The review stresses that robotic systems introduce new cognitive and psychomotor demands. Effective pre-procedural training before in vivo operation reduces risk, shortens learning curves, and addresses public concern about how surgeons learn robotic techniques.
So what components do most curricula share?
Common elements form a progression: supporting information, didactics, online modules, vendor materials, hands-on system orientation and bedside demonstrations, part task practice using virtual reality and dry lab stations, and higher fidelity whole task practice using wet labs or cadavers for senior trainees. Many programs then follow with dual console mentorship, proctoring, or graded clinical integration.
How are those educational choices framed theoretically?
The review maps programs to Kern's 6-step curriculum design and the 4CID instructional model. Supporting information targets mental models. Procedural information provides stepwise rules. Part task practice builds automated routines. And whole task learning recreates authentic procedures, consistent with cognitive load and mastery learning principles.
Assessment is crucial. How do programs test readiness?
Assessment methods varied. Many programs rely on VR simulator metrics and kinematic data. Some use validated tools like GEARS and OSATs. The review evaluated validity evidence against Messick's framework and looked at Kirkpatrick learning outcomes. A trend towards proficiency-based progression, where learners advance on demonstrated skill, was notable compared with older time-based models.
Any concerns or gaps the review highlights?
Yes. Non-technical skills, leadership, communication, crisis management are inconsistently assessed. There's heavy reliance on industry-led training, which often targets experienced surgeons rather than novices. Resource barriers, cost, faculty time, access were also common. About half of curricula reported some vendor relationships.
What practical, actionable takeaways should educators and program leads consider?
A few clear actions. Adopt competency or proficiency-based progression rather than fixed hours. Embed deliberate practice with timely feedback. Use VR kinematics for scalable feedback, but supplement with expert coaching. Include structured non-technical skills training and assessment. Design curricula around cognitive load principles, spaced retrieval, interleaving, and testing. And seek institutional solutions for cost and access, such as including simulators in procurement business cases.
The review suggested a national or standard framework. What would that look like?
A platform-agnostic, staged curriculum integrated into core surgical training, foundational online modules, mandatory system orientation, VR-based part-task proficiency gates, supervised whole task labs for advanced trainees, then graded clinical exposure with proctorship. Use validated assessment tools and report validity evidence so credentialing decisions are defensible.
Any final cautions?
The field moves fast. New platforms and curricula appear rapidly. Programs should continuously evaluate outcomes, share validity data, and adapt. Also be transparent about conflicts and ensure training meets the needs of novice surgeons, not just experienced adopters.
Great summary. Before we sign off, a reminder of our source and a closing note.
Absolutely. This episode drew on that systematic review and thematic metasynthesis we discussed, and as mentioned at the top, it is based on the prospectus review by Dr. Reza Lankarani.
So imagine waking up from a complex, life-altering surgery, and you're just relieved it went perfully.
Right, best feeling in the world.
Exactly. But then, imagine discovering your surgeon practiced using their $2 million robotic instruments less than a teenager practices playing Mario Kart.
Yeah, that is a terrifying reality.
It really is. The robot itself is flawless, right? It boasts absolute engineering-level precision. But the way we train the humans driving it, it is currently the Wild West.
You step into these operating rooms today, and it literally feels like stepping onto a spaceship. It's clean, it's categorized, it's designed to eliminate human error. But the sheer precision of the hardware completely masks the massive variability in how we actually teach surgeons to use it.
And if you're listening to this, you might be thinking, wait, they don't already have a strict, unified national standard for robotic surgery?
Spoiler alert, they don't.
Right. The answer is no. We are running on a patchwork system. So today, we are examining this rapid, exponential adoption of robotic surgery and the resulting crisis in how the medical field structures pre-procedural training.
Yeah, the central question is really this. Should the credentialing of robotic surgeons rely on a rigid, standardized national proficiency framework that demands, high-fidelity simulation, or should it prioritize an adaptable, scalable approach relying on cost-effective, rudimentary platforms and tailored, time-based components?
To ground this discussion, we are pulling directly from the landmark June 2026 systematic review published in the Annals of Surgery Open by Devine, Cullinade, Mohan, and their colleagues.
Incredible paper.
Truly. We are also weaving in critical commentary from Dr. Reza Lankarani, along with the insights discussed in episode 147 of the Surgical Pioneering podcast, titled The Robot, the Surgeon, and the Curriculum, Setting the Standard.
Which is highly recommended listening, by the way.
Definitely. So my position today is that patient safety demands a strict, standardized national proficiency framework. I argue this framework must rely heavily on the 4CID instructional design model, and it absolutely must make high-fidelity simulation like wet labs and non-technical skills training mandatory for all surgical grades.
Well, and my stance is that we must champion a scalable, localized approach. We should utilize cost-effective rudimentary platforms, retain time-based training elements, and critically, we have to differentiate the cognitive training needs of a novice resident from those of an experienced attending.
Let's start with the sheer velocity of what is happening in operating rooms globally, because it really frames everything.
It does.
According to the Divine Review, which screened over 700 records to analyze 56 distinct training curricula, 47% of all curriculum publications appeared just between 2018 and 2024.
That is a staggering exponential curve.
It's massive. We are racing to implement these platforms, but the educational framework is playing catch-up.
Right. The hardware is arriving faster than the pedagogy.
Exactly, which is why training must firmly and permanently transition to proficiency-based progression. We just have to move from a mindset of served time to earned privilege.
See, I have to stop you there, because framing time-based learning as merely served time entirely misses how the human brain actually retains information.
How so? If a surgeon sits at a console for 50 hours but never masters a suturing technique, those 50 hours are meaningless to the patient on the table, right?
Well, you're assuming time-based training means only sitting in a room and staring at a screen. But let's look at the concept of pure proficiency, because it has massive blind spots in practice. Let's look at the ADSCOLI study highlighted in the material.
The one about VR hours?
Yeah, it revealed that 62.5% of programs claiming to be proficiency-based required absolutely zero virtual reality hours. Zero.
Wow.
And of those that did require VR, 86% demanded less than 10 hours.
Which, okay, that just means those specific programs are poorly designed. That's not the model's fault.
It means proficiency is dangerously subjective. Look, pure proficiency is like passing a driving test by flawlessly navigating an empty parking lot on a Tuesday, and then being told you're fully licensed to drive on the highway.
That's a bit of a stretch.
No, hear me out. Time-based requirements force you to drive in traffic for months. Time-based hours act as a necessary guardrail to ensure longitudinal exposure and what we call in cognitive science, spaced retrieval.
Okay, break down spaced retrieval for us in this context.
Think about how you study for a test. If you cram all night, you might pass the test the next morning, right?
Sure, yeah.
That's demonstrating proficiency at a single point in time. But a week later, you've forgotten all of it. When you learn a complex motor skill, your neurons need to form connections, let them slightly decay, and then fire them up again.
Okay, so it's about building permanence.
Exactly. Spaced retrieval means repeating a task at increasing intervals so you don't forget it. It builds permanent neural pathways. If you only measure proficiency once, you have no idea if that surgical skill will decay a month later. Time requirements enforce that spacing.
That makes perfect sense neurologically. But the flaw you're describing isn't a failure of proficiency-based progression itself, it's a failure of assessment.
I'd argue they go hand in hand.
But if a program requires zero VR hours, it isn't a robust proficiency model, it's a rubber stamp. And this is exactly why we cannot rely on localized hospital standards. We need a standardized national framework governed by the 4CID model.
Ah, yes, the 4 components of instructional design.
Right. The Divine Review applied Kern's 6-step curriculum development model and found that this 4CID blueprint is the ideal theory-driven path.
It's definitely comprehensive.
It is. It doesn't just list tasks, it fundamentally structures how a surgeon's brain maps the procedure. You start with component 1, supporting information, the theory and anatomy.
Right.
Component 2 is procedural information, the step-by-step cognitive rules of how the robot actually works. Then component 3 is part task practice, which is highly repetitive VR drills for muscle memory.
And then the big one.
Right. Component 4 is full learning tasks, which means whole procedures in a high-fidelity wet lab. And the key is, you don't move to step 4 until step 3 is objectively mastered.
It sounds beautiful on paper.
It's not just on paper, though. We have proof of concept. Look at Boal et al.'s work in the UK. They published a specific core accreditation curriculum recently. It shows that a singular national pathway enforcing this model is actionable policy.
Actionable, sure, perhaps. But we need to look at the underlying structural and financial realities shaping these frameworks.
Like what?
Well, the systematic review noted a staggering statistic. 50% of the curricula had authors with financial ties to the vendors. Intuitive, Versius, Hugo.
Okay, but that's common in early adoption phases.
We are talking about honoraria, consultancies, and research grants.
Are you saying the curricula are intentionally compromised?
I'm saying that out of 56 curricula, only 11 were actually platform agnostic. If we prematurely standardize a national credentialing body around these industry-influenced curricula, we risk legally locking in vendor monopolies under the guise of national safety standards.
That's a cynical view.
It's a realistic one. But even more critically, when you look through the Messick validity framework applied in the study, most of these curricula only possess content validity.
Meaning what? A group of subject matter experts sat in a room and agreed, yes, this training looks right.
Exactly. Just experts nodding along. What they completely lack is consequential validity, or what the industry calls Kirkpatrick Level 4 evaluation.
Okay, let's unpack Kirkpatrick for a second so we're clear on the stakes.
Gladly. The Kirkpatrick model basically measures how well training works. Level 1 is just asking the trainee, did you like the course?
The smile sheet.
Right. Level 2 asks, did you learn the material? Level 3 is, are you using it on the job? But level 4, consequential validity, is the holy grail. It tracks the trainee down 5 years later to see if their actual patients have lower complication rates.
Which is incredibly hard to measure.
Hard but necessary. It measures the ultimate real-world consequence. Right now, there is virtually no longitudinal data proving that completing these specific 4 CI frameworks actually improves patient outcomes. We are running on faith, not data.
I understand the demand for level 4 data. I really do. But let me give you a different perspective on consequential validity. We know from high reliability industries, like commercial aviation, that waiting for catastrophic failures to generate 5 years of longitudinal data is an unacceptable way to design safety protocols.
But aviation uses simulators, not real planes, for the first flight.
Exactly my point. We have to build the parachute before we jump out of the plane.
But you're building a parachute out of solid gold and demanding every single hospital buy one.
Because the alternative is jumping with a plastic bag. And that brings us to the most resource-intensive part of the 4CID model, full learning tasks. Specifically, high-fidelity wet lab simulation using animal models or cadavers.
Which is where the entire system bottlenecks.
The Divine Review uncovered a massive red flag here. While 36% of senior attending curricula include wet lab practice, for residents, that number drops to just 22%.
Which makes perfect sense when you look at resource allocation, scalability, and frankly, how the brain works.
Let me finish this point because this is crucial. Relying on rudimentary platforms leaves patients incredibly vulnerable to the unexpected. Virtual reality and inanimate dry labs, moving little plastic blocks around with robotic pinchers, they are excellent for learning what the console buttons do.
Yes, they are.
But they cannot simulate tissue that bleeds. They cannot mimic the chaotic reality of a deteriorating patient.
VR technology is advancing rapidly, though.
But it still doesn't teach non-technical skills. Less than a third of curricula consistently cover crew resource management, so leadership, communication, situational awareness. We are teaching people how to manipulate joysticks, but we aren't running emergency scenarios.
You can run those without a cadaver.
But imagine a dry run of the console. The trainee's locked in. Suddenly, a circulating nurse role-plays a fire alarm or a sudden massive hemorrhage. Can the trainee undock the robot in seconds while communicating clearly with the anesthesiologist? A plastic model or digital screen just cannot induce the psychological stress necessary to test those non-technical skills.
Okay, I have to jump in here because you are conflating two entirely different things.
Am I?
Yes. You are conflating the absolute necessity of non-technical skills with the necessity of high-fidelity wet labs. You can run a fire alarm drill or practice crew resource management using a dry lab or a VR simulator. You don't need an expensive animal model to practice communication and undocking.
But the psychological stakes are lower. It feels like a game.
The stakes are lower, sure, but the cognitive pathway of the undocking protocol is exactly the same. The reality is that VR simulation is already adopted in 86% of curricula because it is scalable.
Scalable, but insufficient.
Wet labs introduce immense logistical hurdles, massive costs, biological hazards, facility requirements, and huge faculty time drains. The Divine Review noted some curricula require $2,200 per trainee and $690 faculty hour.
Which I would argue is a necessary rounding error when a hospital is already dropping $2 million on the robot itself.
It's not a rounding error for a rural hospital or in low and middle income settings. Look at the geographic representation in the data. 29 curricula from North America, 17 from Europe, and only 1 from South America.
That's a valid point about access, but
mandating expensive wet labs creates an exclusionary elitist standard. Using porcine models or cadavers for every single trainee across all grades is just an insurmountable barrier. VR repetition is highly effective for part task practice, which is all that is strictly necessary before a trainee moves to bedside assisting and eventually a dual console setup in a real operating room.
But a junior trainee about to perform their first independent case needs the high-stakes realism of a wet lab just as much, if not more, than a veteran attending who is simply transitioning from laparoscopy to robotics.
No, they really don't.
If we are putting a resident in the console alone with a patient under anesthesia, they need to have experienced the physical sensation of tissue handling and complication management beforehand.
This is where we have to lean heavily on the educational neuroscience that the Divine Review so brilliantly highlights, specifically cognitive load theory. You are treating all learners as if their brains process the robotic interface the exact same way. Neurologically, they don't.
Okay, walk us through the difference there.
Let's use a non-medical analogy. Think of a surgeon's working memory like a computer's RAM. You only have so much available at one time. Cognitive load theory breaks this down into 3 types. First, intrinsic load, the inherent difficulty of the task. Second, extraneous load, the distractions, the environment, the complicated interface. And third, germane load, the actual brain power used to build permanent muscle memory and learn.
All right, RAM and 3 types of load. How did that separate a resident from an attending?
An experienced attending surgeon already possesses what is called canonical competence.
Right, context-independent surgical skill.
Yes, they know human anatomy inside and out, they know exactly how to dissect, they know how to manage a bleed instinctively, their intrinsic load is low. They simply need the procedural information to map those existing skills to a new robotic interface.
So the wet lab's good for them.
Therefore, putting them in a wet lab is highly beneficial. They can handle the bleeding tissue because their brain already knows what to do with it.
And the resident?
Residents are in an entirely different cognitive phase. They're still forming basic cognitive schemas. Their intrinsic load, just figuring out the anatomy and the steps of the surgery, is already incredibly high.
I see where you're going with this.
If you put a junior resident into a high-fidelity wet lab prematurely, you max out their RAM. The bleeding tissue, the complex setup, the high-stakes environment, the alarms, it all creates massive extraneous load. The system crashes. That extraneous load robs them of the germane load they need to actually learn the robot.
So you're arguing the wet lab actually hurts their learning?
Yes. For a resident, lower cost, highly repetitive VR is actually superior because it is closing all those background browser tabs. It isolates the variables, it removes the bleeding, removes the stress, reduces extraneous load, and allows their brain to just focus on automating the motor skills of the joysticks. Only once those basics are entirely automated should they ever step into a wet lab.
I actually agree with your breakdown of cognitive load theory there. It is a precise explanation, and frankly, it perfectly illustrates why the 4CID model is so vital.
Wait, how does it support your point?
Because the model explicitly paces that exact transition from part-task VR to whole-task wet lab, so the learner's RAM isn't overwhelmed. But my core argument remains. The wet lab must be guaranteed at the very end of that sequence for everyone, including residents, before clinical credentialing.
But why mandate it nationally if the local hospital knows what its learners need?
Because if we allow hospitals to localize and adapt their standards based on their budget, hospital administrators will inevitably cut the wet lab component entirely.
Come on, not necessarily.
Let's be real. They will. They will cite the very cost and cognitive load arguments you just made to justify saving money. They will settle for VR because it's cheap, and patients will pay the ultimate price when a vessel is nicked and the trainee hasn't experienced real physical tissue retraction. This is why a standardized, rigid, national mandate is the only way to protect the integrity of the training.
A rigid mandate that a hospital cannot afford doesn't magically create wet labs. It simply means that hospital shuts down its training program entirely. Or worse, they push the training onto the vendor's 2-day weekend courses because they lack an internal pathway that meets your national standard.
That's a fair concern.
But flexibility is not the enemy of safety. A scalable approach, perhaps one driven by specialty-specific VR benchmarks like Fidelit all published in urology, ensures that every hospital, regardless of geographic or financial status, can participate in raising the floor of surgical safety.
Well, let's synthesize where we stand. My stance remains resolute. The exponential adoption of robotic surgery is vastly outstripping our educational infrastructure. Patient safety absolutely demands a rigorous, standardized national framework. We cannot allow credentialing to be dictated by the varying budgets of individual hospital administrators.
I hear you.
By mandating proficiency through the comprehensive 4CID model and guaranteeing access to high-fidelity wet labs for all surgeons, residents, and attendings alike, we ensure that every practitioner has the procedural, technical, and non-technical skills required to prevent catastrophes before they touch a human being.
And I maintain that while our end goal of patient safety is identical, the path to get there must be grounded in reality, not just pedagogical theory. A scalable, adaptable training model that utilizes cost-effective VR is the only feasible path forward for a global medical community.
Right.
We must respect the neuroscientific differences in cognitive load between a novice resident building schemas and an experienced attending transferring skills. And we must maintain time-based guardrails to ensure spaced retrieval. Demanding a rigid, high-fidelity standard for every learner across the globe will only stifle education, shut down rural programs, and solidify vendor monopolies.
Despite our different perspectives on the execution, it is clear we have arrived at several crucial points of convergence today. First, based on the stark findings from the source material, we absolutely agree that relying on a vendor-provided 2-day course is entirely insufficient for a novice surgeon.
Completely agreed. That is a dangerous shortcut. Those industry curricula are designed for experienced surgeon switching platforms, not for building foundational skills in residents.
Right. And secondly, we are in total alignment regarding the massive, unmet need for non-technical skills training. Regardless of whether it happens in a high-fidelity wet lab or via a dry-run simulation using VR, teaching communication, situational awareness, and emergency protocols like fire alarms must become a core pillar of any curriculum moving forward.
Exactly. We can't just teach the joysticks. We have to teach the room.
Well said. Ultimately, the Divine Review and the broader conversations happening in places like the Surgical Pioneering podcast serve as an essential North Star for the medical community. They map the forest, pointing out exactly which pedagogical trees we are missing in our rush to adopt new technology.
And they remind us that the search for true consequential validity, Kirkpatrick level 4, proving that these expensive educational investments actually lower complication rates for patients years down the line, is far from over. We have content validity, but the real-world proof is still pending.
Indeed. We started this discussion talking about the $2 million machine and the expectation of perfection. But as we've explored today, that robotic precision is merely an illusion if the hands at the console are guided by a murky, inconsistent educational background. The hardware is clearly ready for the future. The question remains, is the curriculum?